Welcome to Next to Madison, a podcast to help you live your best life.
Welcome back to another episode of Next to Madison. I am your host, Madison Malloy, and on today's episode, I am so thankful, as it is Thanksgiving. I'm thankful for all my guests, but we have got General David Petraeus with us today, who is going into his amazing background and the experiences he's had, what's going on over in Ukraine, what's going on over in the Middle East with Gaza and Hamas, and just an in-depth kind of behind the scenes look at what's happening and where he kind of sees things going. We also talk about the traits of what makes a fantastic leader, how he celebrates this amazing, thankful holiday that we're so blessed to have, and his views on the upcoming administrations, on NATO, on tariffs, on the housing crisis. We kind of cover it all. Nothing was really off limits. It is an amazing conversation that I know you will absolutely enjoy. So I appreciate each and every one of you who continues to tune into this podcast, Next to Madison, where our aim is to make you happier, healthier, and wealthier. So we'll be right back after this brief message with our guest, General Petraeus.
It's your host, Madison Malloy, and I have exciting news. My new product is now available on Amazon called Color Your Way to Abundance, a 21-day manifestation guide for wealth, health, and love. This unique coloring journal will help you manifest by coloring in the affirmations while you continue to repeat them. This will help activate these affirmations so they become a reality. Grab your copy today and relax, color, and start manifesting.
We are back with our amazing guest. We've got author, legend. I mean, this guy is amazing. He's famous. Most of you know who he is, but he's going to go through his backstory just a little bit. We have got General Petraeus, former CIA director, amazing human being. So welcome to the show. How are you?
Good to be with you, Madison. Doing great, thanks.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So just for the few people that might not know you, just give us a brief background of your history, because it is absolutely mind-blowing.
Well, I was born and raised 50 miles north of New York City, 7 miles from the U.S. Military Academy, where I went and was an undergraduate, and then was commissioned into the infantry as a second lieutenant, 37 years in the U.S. Army. Culminated my time in uniform with 6 commands as a general officer, 5 of which were in combat, including the surge in Iraq, U.S. Central Command, and coalition forces in Afghanistan. Then was privileged to serve as the director of the CIA. And then for the last 11 and a half years, have been the chairman of the KKR Global Institute at KKR, which I established, and a partner at KKR during a period of really quite extraordinary growth. We've gone, in fact, from $83 billion under management to $624 billion as of last quarter, which was the most successful in our history. I've also been an academic along the way. I earned a PhD at Princeton in a combination of international relations and economics. I've had academic appointments of various types, either as a visiting professor or a part-time chair or fellow or what have you at the University of Southern California, the Honors College of the City, University of New York, Harvard's Belfer Center, and currently, and also at West Point, where I taught international relations and economics. And I'm currently the Kissinger Fellow at Yale, where in the spring semester, I co-lead a graduate seminar on great power competition. I'm on a couple of boards of companies that KKR owns. I'm the strategic advisor for some others. I'm a personal venture capitalist invested in over 30 startups. I had the book Conflict, The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Gaza now. That's the second edition subtitle. And it was a New York Times bestseller. Not that I'm competitive at all. And, wonderful family and 4 great grandkids and all the rest of it. So very, very fortunate. I generally travel the world almost nonstop. I typically visit about 25 different countries for KKR and other activities. Many of those more than one time, most major cities in the U.S. I'm actually with the Washington Speakers Bureau as well, and then with a number of think tanks and
Yeah.
a very substantial number of veterans and military and family organizations.
Yeah, I mean your background is so impressive. So what was one of the biggest things you learned in the military that you feel has made you successful in business?
Well, there's a number of things that I'd like to think that I learned. I mean, the first and foremost is that the reality is that life is a competitive endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get a t-shirt just for showing up. This is not little kid soccer where everybody gets a trophy.
Yeah.
You get it for being the best, or at least trying to be the very best. And you want to do that while also being the best team player that you can be. But you have to embrace the reality that, again, the rewards go to the people that do really, really well. And again, life is a competitive endeavor.
Yeah.
Get used to it, get over it. Don't be satisfied. Nobody wants to be led by somebody who is proud to be average. In fact, I remember going back to West Point after the first tour in Iraq. I was a two-star general, commander of the Great 101st Airborne Division during the fight to Baghdad, and then the subsequent first year, which included air assaulting north to Mosul and getting it under control. And I asked to go back, called up the commandant who had worked for me in an earlier assignment in the 82nd Airborne Division. And I said, I really need to talk to the seniors, to the first class cadets, because they're going to graduate in about 4 months. And they need some reality, which included stating to them that nobody wants to be led by somebody who's proud to be average or was satisfied with the gentleman's be. In fact, I said that this is a different time at West Point than at any time in many, many decades. There's no question that you are going to lead America's sons and daughters in combat after graduation. That's always a prospect out there, but of course, we'd had no long wars for many, many decades. And all of a sudden, it's very certain, very clear that they are going to assume that most awesome of all responsibilities, which is, again, leading our men and women in uniform in combat. And
Yeah.
I said, you need to get really serious about preparing for this. You've got to be able to lead from the front, not from the rear. You've got to master every detail of your particular branch, your field, your activities. And that's what your soldiers want you to do, because that gives them the greatest chance that they'll come home alive. So it was a pretty straightforward message. And I think that's the message. This is what I most learned from in the military. Then certainly over time, I ultimately distilled an intellectual construct for the exercise of strategic leadership. That's leadership at the very top, which has 4 tasks. And I did this for myself, knowing that I was going to go back to Iraq as a 4-star. I was there as a 2-star, 3-star, and was told I was going to go back as a 4-star. I ended up going back about 5 or 6 months earlier than what it was expected, because the situation had deteriorated so dramatically. And the president decided to get new leadership on the ground, commander and the ambassador, new secretary of defense in the Pentagon, ultimately got a new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and so forth. And this model has 4 elements. There are 4 tasks. First and foremost, and far away the most important, is to get the big ideas right, to craft the right strategy. And when it comes to conflict, you have to understand the nature of the war in which you're engaged, your forces, the enemy forces, the physical terrain, the human terrain, all the elements of society, how the country is supposed to work, how it really works, the neighborhood, and the rest of that. And again, craft the right big ideas. Then the second task is to communicate the big ideas through the breadth and depth of the organization, so that those who are literally in the bottom, they're carrying out operations outside the wire, under body armor and Kevlar, doing what only they can do, which is to engage the population and engage the enemy, understand how to translate big ideas at your level into concrete actions at theirs. But it's also to communicate all of this to everyone who has a stake in the outcome of that endeavor, of that conflict. So it's America's mothers and fathers, it's coalition mothers and fathers, it's the Iraqi people. It's the White House, number 10 Downing Street, the Iraqi White House, all of our counterparts there, coalition members, and so forth. The third task is to oversee the implementation of the big ideas, what we normally think of as leadership. This is the energy the leader provides, the inspiration, it's attracting the best and brightest. It's keeping them as long as you can. It's allowing those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's the organizational architecture that you design for carrying out that endeavor. It's the metrics that you use that tell you whether you're winning or losing, making progress or experiencing setbacks. And it's how you spend your time, your battle rhythm, as we term it, your schedule,
Yeah.
the recurring activities, the substance of those. That's how you drive the execution of a campaign plan. And then on that battle rhythm, on your schedule, are events, activities, meetings, and so forth that enable you or sometimes force you, because you have to create action forcing mechanisms for yourself, to perform the fourth task, which is to determine how you need to refine the big ideas as the context evolves and do it again and again and again. And this applies in the business world. We
Yeah.
actually use this explicitly as we're examining investments and as we're identifying the geopolitical risks and ensuring that we can mitigate them sufficiently in the investment process as, again, a partner at KKR and chairman of the KKR Global Institute.
Yeah.
So this really is, I think, a very, very helpful construct for the exercise of strategic leadership. And when you probably will ask me, what do I look for in senior leaders?
Yeah.
It starts with task number one. What's the quality of their operational or strategic judgment, depending on the level? Um, that's what is first and foremost in importance, because if you don't get the big ideas right, I don't care about all the other qualities that the person brings to bear, that enterprise is not going to succeed. And in the book Conflict, my co-author Andrew Roberts and I, Lord Roberts of Belgravia now, we look at each of the conflicts through the prism of this strategic leadership intellectual construct, because it is the quality of the strategic leadership that most determines the outcome in war.
Yeah. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. So what do you feel when you are looking for those leaders? Like, what are some traits that stand out to you right away?
Again, first and foremost, it's all about judgment. I can overlook a lot of other shortcomings, but if
Yeah.
judgment is not there, that individual is not going to be a successful senior leader. Keep in mind that all leaders at all levels perform these four tasks.
Right.
The higher you are to the top, or closer you are to the top, is the more latitude that you have about making decisions. And the person at the very top makes the fundamental decision to pursue the kind of strategy that he or she decides is appropriate. I mean, I should note here, for example, when it came to Vietnam, it took us 13 years to get the big ideas right. We thought we should win a war of attrition with North Vietnam and with the Viet Cong insurgents in South Vietnam, and we clearly could not. All the search and destroy operations and all the body count in the world was not going to bring about a successful outcome. We had the wrong strategy, the wrong big ideas. We failed the great soldiers on the ground thrashing around
Yeah.
in the jungles and the rice paddies and the highlands. We should have been conducting a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign focused on security of the people, with metrics that were focused on that, rather than on, again, these large operations that killed a lot of bad guys and captured in body count that unfortunately started to lack integrity over time as well, but could not bring a successful conclusion to that campaign.
Yeah. So speaking of war, let's fast forward to the Ukrainian war, because you're doing some work with two of our former guests on this podcast over there. Can you tell us more about that? And do you think that we are going to see US troops on the ground there one day? Like, how do you kind of?
I don't expect to see U.S. troops on the ground. In fact, I don't think the Ukrainians want U.S. or European troops on the ground. They recognize that this is their war of independence. It is
Mhm.
their very fight for survival. And what we should be doing is everything we possibly can, even more than we already are, with greater decisions, pace of decisions. We have delayed far too long on some of the critical decisions, to enable Ukraine to change the dynamic in the war so that finally Vladimir Putin recognizes that he cannot achieve additional gains at an acceptable cost. That's really what we need to do. And if you want to negotiate an end to this, and perhaps the incoming president will strive to do that, he's indicated that he
Yeah.
plans to do so. Ukraine needs to be doing so from a position of strength, not a position of weakness. And if they are to be convinced to have a ceasefire, both sides, which would mean that Ukraine would give up 20% of its territory, at least temporarily, then Ukraine needs to be provided an ironclad security guarantee, either by NATO membership or, if that's not possible, some kind of US-led coalition of the willing that will make sure that Vladimir Putin just doesn't take a knee for a couple of years,
Yeah.
rearm, replenish, refit, and then go at Ukraine again, noting that it is
Ooh.
his twisted, historical, grievance-filled, revanchist, revisionist mindset that has led him to pursue this brutal, unprovoked invasion of a neighboring country
Yeah.
whose right to exist he does not recognize.
Yeah. And so what is your work that you're doing over there right now?
Well, it's a variety of undertakings, frankly. In fact, I've been so supportive of Ukraine in Putin's eyes, at least, that I've been sanctioned by Putin.
Oh,
And I should note that this all is a little bit personal, because if you'd read the long version of my introduction, it would have included that I was runner-up for Time Person of the Year in 2007 to Vladimir Putin. But
yeah.
I very strongly believe that we should support a country that shares our values, beliefs, principles, however imperfect they are exhibited there, practiced there, in the face of this unprovoked, horrible, horrific, barbaric invasion by Ukraine, or by
Yeah.
this barbaric invasion by Russia,
Right.
which includes, by the way, systematic Russian attacks to damage or destroy every thermal power plant and hydroelectric power plant, and now going after the transformer and
Oh,
transmission infrastructure around their nuclear power plants, which are the backbone of their electrical generation. So it's going to be a long, cold, hard, and dark winter for the Ukrainian people this year.
oh, it's just, I mean,
So
it's
in
just,
addition to supporting in general, if you will, and trying to convince those in Washington, I'm non-political, by the way. I don't even register to vote, much less support candidates of either party. And I talk to candidates of either party and those actually in various positions, again, of either party. But in addition to that, I also have provided a scholarship to fund the college education for a child of a fallen patriot, as the individual is described. Father was killed in action in the American University of Kyiv. I've done a lot with other organizations there for the Kyiv School of Economics, again, as a former econ and international relations professor of the Kyiv Security Forum. I'm on their board. I support the Yalta European Strategy gathering every year there, and also in Munich,
yeah.
and a variety of
Wow.
other activities like that. But then the latest is to help Mental Health Global, again, which Missy Purdue and I are working very hard to generate resources. That's led by a very impressive entrepreneur based out of Houston
Yeah.
in the AI and data center space. And she and her CTO, just in fact back from Ukraine, having taken there the massive bags full of the hardware, the server architecture that has an AI model on it that will then be trained to help address the vast unmet need for mental health assistance in that country. It's a very
Yeah.
innovative approach. It needs to be proven out. It's being done in partnership with the American University of Kyiv, where again I was involved before, and the president of which is a fellow West Point graduate whom I've known for a long time. So that's the latest endeavor there, and it's a very, very important one.
Oh, absolutely. Because when Claire was on the show, there's just not enough people to help all the
Not
people that are
remotely,
in need.
not remotely enough. This is a country in which conservatively half the population needs mental health assistance. Uh, and there's maybe five or so actual mental health professionals per 100,000 citizens.
Yeah, which is yeah, especially now with everything kind of going on. So in your opinion, like what do you think it would take to end this war?
Well, again, if we can enable Ukraine to achieve what I described earlier, which is to sufficiently strengthen the front lines together with their extraordinary innovation, 1.5 million drones in just the first 9 months of this year, to convince Vladimir Putin that he can achieve additional gains at an acceptable cost. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
The U.S., to be fair, has very impressively led the world in the response to Russia's invasion. It's kept North America and Europe together. It's kept Eastern and Western Europe together. But the delays in critical decisions, really important ones, like the U.S. tanks, which delayed the German tanks, the F-16 aircraft, which clearly that was inescapable. You had to do that. They'd run out of the old Russian and Soviet bloc aircraft that were the backbone of the Ukrainian Air Force. Decisions on the Army tactical missile system, then on restrictions to the use of that on Russian soil, improved conventional cluster munitions, now anti-personnel mines. All of these were ultimately taken, but took far too long. And then, of course, our House of Representatives, with its unconscionable more than 6 month delay in the debate over the continued support of Ukraine, something that was never really in doubt because there are such large bipartisan majorities in each party and in each house, and should have done far sooner. And that really cost the Ukrainians when the pipeline from the U.S. ran dry. Here we should note, by the way, the Europeans in aggregate have provided more than the U.S. when it comes to the total of humanitarian assistance, financial aid, and the security assistance. They are stepping up, although clearly we are the big contributor when it comes to just strictly security assistance.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. So, and then let's go over to Gaza now and what's kind of going on over there. Like, where do you see
what's going on
this?
over there is that Israel sustained the worst day in its entire history.
Yeah.
We lost not quite 3,000 in the 9/11 attacks. In our demographic terms, what Israel suffered was the loss of 40,000 and 7,000 taken hostage. It was the worst intelligence failure in Israel's history, and there were some other significant ones, including the 1973 Yom Kippur War. It's the worst military readiness failure. The response to the actions of Hamas and this barbaric, unspeakable actions that they pursued, wholly inadequate. And then it's the worst political miscalculation because the prime minister and others and senior in government thought that Hamas was becoming at least a somewhat responsible neighbor and appreciative of the many, many additional worker visas that they were being provided, when it turned out that those worker visas were largely being used to conduct reconnaissance of the various locations in southern Israel that they needed to attack to blind the Israelis, to disrupt or destroy their communications, and to limit the effectiveness of the response by the Israeli military. Now, in response to all of that, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu rightly called for the destruction of Hamas, to ensure that Hamas can never govern Gaza again, and to get the hostages back. And those big ideas, I think, or those objectives, are appropriate. The problem is that there should be at least one more, which is to make lives for the Palestinian people in Gaza better without Hamas in them, and to lay out the political vision for achieving that particular objective. But also then recognizing the strategy that is required. Israel has dramatically degraded the capabilities of Hamas, but it is not preventing it from reconstituting. And destruction entails not just, again, dramatic degradation, but then preventing them from rebuilding what it is that they had. Now, Israel has taken control of the southern border between Gaza and Egypt, and it shouldn't be pushed to give it up for a temporary ceasefire for any reason, really, because that prevents the flow of weapons, ammunition, explosives, and other material through the Rafah crossing, the southern border from Egypt, and also the tunnels that used to go underneath that particular border. And Israel is preventing both of those, which means at the very least Hamas can't reconstitute all of its weapons and ammunition, rearm itself. But at the end of the day, there really needs to be the establishment of security in Gaza. And Palestinian security forces are not going to go in and fight Hamas. Arab forces aren't going to go in and fight Hamas. Americans aren't going to do that. And I think it falls on Israel to do that and to carry out a campaign that addresses Hamas as it is now. It's no longer organized companies, battalions, brigades. It's essentially insurgents, guerrillas. And to counter that, you have to have a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign, which they don't. And the only way to establish that is not to continue what they've been doing, which is clear and leave, or conduct a raid, destroy, kill a bunch of Hamas fighters, extremists, destroy their infrastructure that's still there, and then withdraw. Because what's running Gaza right now are basically criminals, guys with guns. It's criminals, it's remnants of Hamas, which do continue to reconstitute in personnel terms. And the same with respect to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another Islamist extremist group. So Israel, I think, needs to go in and clear it from north to south and hold it. And you create a number of gated communities, come in a mile, put an east-west wall, a couple north-south walls, 3 gated communities, clear them painstakingly, issue biometric ID cards to the citizens who are not Hamas, and therefore are allowed to be in these areas. And then you do it another mile and east, west, north, south. And of course, then you can provide, once you have security, you can have organized provision of humanitarian assistance, which is not possible right now. The UN World Food Program trucks go in, they get hijacked 500 meters inside the border by guys with guns, and who take the food to their preferred warehouse or storage location. You could get restoration of basic services begun. You can start rebuilding. Arab forces will come in to help with this and also help fund it. You could bring in Palestinian security forces trained in the Jordan International Police Training Center, where we trained many, many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Iraqi police when I was a 3-star in Iraq, overseeing that and the restoration and the rebuilding, reestablishment of the Ministry of Defense elements. And just keep going. You keep going. Yes, it's going to get tougher. Gaza City is going to be particularly challenging. Yes, there's 350 miles of underground tunnels and huge subterranean manufacturing and weaponization factories and so on. But if you don't do that, what you do is you consign the innocent civilians of Gaza to a humanitarian catastrophe, noting that tens of thousands of them have been killed, along with tens of thousands of Hamas, and that the destruction is very, very considerable. At least 70 or more % of all structures have been damaged or destroyed. So again, I think it's about getting the overarching big ideas right. But there's resistance to this, perhaps understandable, in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, given that it's hard to distinguish after such a traumatic event between Hamas and the residents of Gaza. But if you don't do this, if you don't provide a better future for them and their families, again, with Hamas out of their lives, you have no hope ever. And this is not a guarantee, but at least it provides hope that you could actually have residents of Gaza, Palestinians, living in peace with Jews in Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long do you think something like that would take? Are we talking years, or you think they could, with enough manpower?
Overall, it would take years to actually have a successful transition, but the pace of the establishment of security, of clearing and holding and rebuilding, at least the initial stages, I think could be done in months. But again, it's going to depend on how tenacious Hamas is, how much additional weaponry and explosives and ammunition they have that still are hidden away in these tunnel complexes underneath the ground. A variety of different factors. How many forces Israel can dedicate to this? And with the prospect of a ceasefire with Hezbollah now very much front and center, which would be a significant victory for Israel, especially if there are safeguards to monitor and to enforce whatever the agreement is, and conditions under which Israel could still engage and ensure that Hezbollah cannot be rearmed that they have in the past. So that would be a significant, and then you could focus once again on Gaza while still keeping a very close eye on the West Bank, the Houthis in Yemen, and directly on Iran and its other proxy elements throughout the region.
Oh, I mean, it's unbelievable. So how many years has Hamas been building these tunnels? I mean, 350 miles of underground tunnels?
Many, many years. And this has been funded. And again, the Israelis allowed Qatari funding of a variety of programs in Gaza, a good bit of which was diverted to these kinds of pursuits. And in the meantime, as I mentioned earlier, the southern border between Gaza and the Sinai, Egyptian-controlled Sinai, the crossing there, the official crossing, and the tunnels underneath that particular border were being used to bring that stuff into the country as well.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, because I remember hearing like they were bombing the tunnels, but a lot of these hostages are still kept in these tunnels, correct?
Yes. Yeah, there's no question about it. And again, this is the most diabolically challenging urban combat setting in modern times, without question. This
Yeah.
is far tougher than Fallujah, Ramadi, Bakuba, Mosul, Baghdad, all in one. So I do not want to downplay in the least the challenges of conducting a clear whole bill campaign that is necessary to achieve security and provide the better future for the Palestinian people without Hamas being among them. Very, very challenging. Keeping in mind that, as I know, the former Israeli Minister of Defense now, who was fired several weeks ago, in part because he favored some kind of approach like this. But he was quite honest. He said, "Look, we don't have a counterinsurgency field manual such as you uh, drafted and published when you were a three-star back in the States. My one non-combat tour was overseeing a whole bunch of different organizations that could help transform every aspect of our preparation of our forces, leaders, organizations, material for deployment to Iraq and Afghanistan." He said, "We don't know what right looks like. We have never trained for it. We don't have large standing forces such as you had during the surge in Iraq
Yeah.
in particular. And so really, really hard." I said, "Yes, exactly. Agree with all of that. But there is no alternative in my mind if you want to achieve the possibility, at the very least, the hope, again, that Palestinians could live side by side with Jews in peace."
Yeah, and it's got to be so difficult, like the experiences you've had, like how to make those drastic measures, knowing that innocent civilians are going to have to be killed with it,
Well,
unfortunately.
you obviously always try to keep that to a minimum. We had a
Yeah,
sign on the wall in the 5 operations centers I was privileged to lead as a general officer in combat that asked, "Will this operation take more bad guys off the street than it creates by its conduct?" And that's what you're trying to do always. You're obviously trying
right.
to reduce to an absolute minimum the possibility of loss of innocent civilian life and even damage to civilian infrastructure. But that's very, very difficult to operationalize, especially in a setting like Gaza, where you
Yeah,
have to bomb deep, and that's just inevitably going to cause damage to other structures. Again, you've got to get
yeah,
underground. That's where the enemy headquarters were. That's where they're, again, these military industrial complexes actually is the only way to describe them. That's where they are. And so the challenges of that cannot be overstated.
yeah. I mean, it's just so. Do you think with the new administration that there will be some sort of peace deal, or we just don't know yet?
Well, there's different negotiations, keep in mind. The one is actually being concluded right now, we believe, and that is between Israel and really Hezbollah and the Lebanese government.
Okay.
Noting that, of course, Hezbollah was the most powerful Iranian supported militia. It's the most powerful non-state actor in the world. It had 150,000 rockets, missiles, drones, and so forth at the outset of this campaign, and is now down to well under 25,000 of those. And because of the extraordinary supply chain operation that the Israelis carried out that resulted in thousands of pagers blowing up on the senior leaders of Hezbollah, the
Yeah.
entire organization has not just been decapitated, it's the leadership has been decimated. And then Israel's
Yeah.
carried out a very extensive, comprehensive set of airstrikes, probably over 10,000 different targets at this point in time, that has dramatically degraded Hezbollah's arsenal, its
Yeah.
capabilities. They've destroyed its command and control communications
Yeah.
system. And that's why Hezbollah has not been able to craft and carry out the kind of massive strike that could overwhelm the sophisticated Israeli air and ballistic missile defense system.
Yeah, I mean, thank God. But yeah, that was amazing how they were able, just with the intelligence, able to pinpoint all those pagers.
With respect to Hamas, again, you're not going to negotiate with Hamas. There have been efforts to do so. There's been a temporary ceasefire that resulted in some of the hostages being released. But at this point, the Hamas conditions for any further ceasefire are truly unacceptable to Israel. Israel cannot leave that southern border between Gaza and Egypt. It cannot leave Gaza and promise never to return. It hasn't completed its task.
Right.
Hamas has been degraded, but not yet destroyed. There is no political vision, much less actually the operationalization of that vision. So that's a longer one out. The big initiative that the incoming administration likely will pursue will be to revive the talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel, so that Saudis might join the Abraham Accord and mutually recognize Israel and Saudi, and establish economic trade and other
Yeah.
regimes in exchange. The problem is that for the Saudis to agree to this, they're insisting on a very firm, almost ironclad path to a two-state solution in which you'd have the Israelis and the Palestinians living side by side. But that has obviously proven to be more than a bit elusive over the years. The Palestinians failed to embrace the very generous terms of Prime Minister Ehud Olmert well over a decade ago or so,
Yeah.
uh, and doesn't have the leadership that can make compromises, nor frankly is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu willing to make compromises either. His coalition likely would collapse if he did so.
Yeah.
So that's probably a very, very high mountain to climb, but is not one that should be ruled out.
Right. No, that makes sense. And so what do you think of people saying that we're on the verge of the Third World War? Do you think
I
that's a
think that the world
possibility?
faces, I think the world faces more challenges in number and more challenges in complexity, particularly the challenge that is represented by the US and Western relationship with China, than at any time, at least since the end of the Cold War, if not World War II.
Right. No, that makes sense.
But that
Um,
doesn't mean we're on the brink of a third world war. Um, it does mean that we are in a relationship that is similar to the Cold War in many respects, but not when it comes to the economic exchange between the US and China, China being our number three trading partner right after Mexico and Canada. And I believe we may actually be there first.
okay, interesting. And do you think that there could ever be a war with US and China?
Nothing is impossible in the world, and we need to be sure that deterrence is rock solid when it comes to that, so that to
Yeah.
ensure a relationship described by our national security advisor as severe competition does not erupt into actual confrontation, military conflict that would be catastrophic, not just for the countries involved, but for the entire world.
Okay. And so what is your kind of opinion on the tariffs that are going to be put in place? Because I feel like there's a lot of talk about the tariffs, but people don't really understand what exactly
Well,
it's
there
going
are
to mean.
already tariffs in place. President Trump imposed some of those during his first
Right.
term. President Biden has kept them and added other tariffs, some very considerable. The tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, 100% of the US and also Canada, I might add, was because they would have completely undercut the development of the US electronic vehicle industry,
Yeah.
because the Chinese are very heavily subsidizing such endeavors as that. And we'll see China try to export other elements of its oversupply, its overproduction. There's no other alternative. They have to export that. And in those cases, the US is going to look at a sector and say, is this a critically important sector? If so, we're going to have to protect it. So what we're already years into a new era of protectionism and a new era of industrial policy. And by all indications, President Trump will actually increase some of the tariffs that are out there, particularly those I suspect on countries that are running major trade surpluses with the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. So what do you think when Howard Lutnick and Elon Musk have talked about this, if the tariffs are high enough, they could potentially remove income tax.
I think there's no prospect of that whatsoever. I'm not sure. And I don't think that Elon Musk has actually said that. I have not seen him quoted as saying that.
Yeah, I saw it
I think
something at one of the
if,
rallies.
let's keep in mind that the impact of these kinds of protectionist measures, because that's what they are,
Okay.
if you actually reduce the flow of immigrants, now we got to get immigration under control, but if you really clamp down on immigration, and if you deport many immigrants who are here, many of whom are engaged, certainly go after the criminals and all the rest of those.
Right.
But most immigrants are engaged in earning a living. In fact, they're even more law abiding in most cases than others, because if they are arrested for something, they could be deported. So again, they have actually helped increase our GDP by trillions of dollars over the years. Now, it should be under control. It should not disadvantage those who are already in our country. It shouldn't replace high-tech workers. They should augment them. So it all has to be done thoughtfully and so on. But if you go beyond that and reduce that very dramatically, sectors in which they are invaluable, agriculture, hospitality, construction, et cetera, are going to really suffer. Wages will go up, costs to consumers will go up. That's inflationary. If we extend tax credits that were about to expire and add new tax cuts, that will be inflationary. And if you throw tariffs on, that will cost items imported will cost more for American consumers and for those who use these as factors of production in their various industries. And so costs are going to go up. They're going to be passed on to consumers. Now, some very valid cases for tariffs that are protecting critical industries that you don't want to see undermined, especially if there's unfair practices in the country of origin, as is the case, for example, with China and their electric vehicle industry. And we'll see, again, other areas of overproduction that they will seek to export. So it's how you apply this. But keep in mind as well that the incoming Trump administration will find the conditions more challenging in certain. Yes, our economy is actually very solid, historically low unemployment, very innovative, productivity is going up, yes, inequality and so forth, but it generally in quite a good condition, and inflation coming back under control. But compared with January 2017, when the first Trump administration took office and the debt to GDP ratio was 75% and going down, real interest rates were near zero. That's a much better situation than 8 years later when they'll take office and the debt to GDP ratio will be over 100% and going up. And real interest rates, again, are real. There's several points, if you will, percentages compared with real interest rates of almost zero in the past. So servicing the debt is much more expensive now, and there's much more debt to service. So keep that in mind as well.
Right.
And the dynamics here, again, if you don't get it right, could be challenging, noting that, yes, we are, again, enjoying incredible innovation at this point in time, AI and a variety of other developments on which we're on the cutting edge, are very promising and have been materializing for a number of years. That's a huge distinguishing feature of the country right now.
And so a lot of people, obviously there's a housing shortage, and some people suspect it's coming from, the mass immigration that's come across the southern border. And what's causing
It's
a
one
lot
of many factors. There's a number of factors for the housing shortage.
Yeah. So how do you think, what would be your advice on how they can deal with it to bring the cost of housing down?
Deregulate. Again, what we've done, sometimes well-meaning, but the conditions, again, nobody wants a multifamily dwelling in their neighborhood. Nobody wants, again, you have all of these restrictions, regulations, not in my backyard kinds of issues that prevent the construction of considerably more dwellings. you have rent control in some cases as well, which limits the incentives for all
Yeah.
this. So you have to approach this in a rational way, ideally not disadvantaging those who are already homeowners, although that's not always 100% possible. But that's what needs to be done. And you find in the locations where the housing is in the greatest of shortages, it's usually because there's a lack of incentives to build new housing and lots of obstacles to doing that, even if the incentives are there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, it is. And then what do you think about, I mean, this is just my opinion. I don't know if I'm right. I'm just guessing, but our market has been propped up and we printed a lot of dollars during COVID. And it's almost just been too high for too long. There's got to be some sort of correction coming. Like, do you see that
Well, I
happening?
mean, everybody said that we were going to have a crash, that there was going to be a hard landing, and there has not been. I think there's actually been
Right.
pretty deft management of the economy. There's been some good fortune there as well with productivity gains and others. The US is still the destination of choice. The dollar is still the currency of record, et cetera. So in many different ways, we have, touch wood, seem to have avoided the hard landing that many feared would be the case. There's no question, I think, now that with hindsight, that the Fed waited too long to increase interest rates and to slow the economy down. There's no question that we probably overspent. But, considering the alternatives, and the alternatives are obvious in other countries of the world where they underspend, I think with hindsight, again, overspending rather
Yeah.
than underspending to cushion the blow of the pandemic downturn, which was so stark and so dramatic at the outset, was the right thing to do. Again, we overdid it, particularly with some of the more latter legislation during the current administration. But again, I think that was preferable to the alternative.
Yeah. No, it's just it's like everything we've been talking about. It's so complicated and there's no direct answer. So it's just
Well, and we have slowed down the money supply. I mean, again, a lot of this is also
yeah,
easing terms, expanding the money supply, et cetera. And some of that went on too long and too late before the Fed actually began to take action. But I think they've actually
right.
quite skillfully guided the economy to a pretty soft landing, if there's even been a landing yet.
Right. No,
What the
exactly.
stock market is doing in the meantime, uh, enormous appreciation, and that has a big effect. The wealth effect that helps consumers is pretty substantial.
Oh, absolutely. So with, the dollar still being the reserve asset, what is your opinion on like digital assets? And do you think that will end up taking over like the Bitcoins and the Ethereums of the world?
I don't think they'll take over, but we're still trying to come to grips with, could you have just a digital asset that's just tied to the dollar? I think that is quite likely. The challenge with Bitcoin and some of the other cryptocurrencies is just the sheer volatility, obviously. The other
Right.
challenge is that they're often used for nefarious purposes to avoid the kinds of uh, transactional oversight that is customary with the payments that are done through the SWIFT system and so on. So there's a circumvention of oversight of regulation of legal limits. Otherwise, it's often used to facilitate, again, nefarious activities, noting the vast majority of it is just folks that are trying to latch on to something that's going to appreciate in value. But, I've always been a bit uncomfortable about the basis of this, and whether this is just all emotion driven or if there's, again, increasingly uh, solid use of it for transactions. And that's coming, but it's not really
Yeah.
still the bottom line of this yet. And whether it's that or a digital dollar or other digital currencies over time that prevails, I'm not sure I'd cast a vote just yet.
Right. Because I mean, it's complicated. You could see like, the benefit to Bitcoin, obviously it's a deflationary type asset because it's limited. They can't just keep printing it. So the value is there. But yes, is it going to be easily exchanged for
Oh,
commerce?
but it's gone down and up. I mean, it is not,
Oh
again, what
yeah.
it's tied to. There's no, how do you value something that is
That's when everybody's going, damn, 2 years ago, that thing was close to 15 grand. But yeah, no, it is. It's definitely had a big swing, but it's definitely hit its highest. I was talking to a friend the other day. I said, if this thing dips back and has a correction and hits 50, buy it. I mean, that's just, kind of my prediction. But this is Thanksgiving, so let's switch gears, and I want to know what goes on. What are your favorite Thanksgiving traditions? What
Oh,
happens at
get
your
the family together.
house? Yeah.
Um, eat turkey and stuffing and dressing and cranberry sauce and all the rest of that. Also getting a great workout so you can justify all of that, and a good glass of red wine, I guess, in there in the mix as well. And have family, friends, grandkids,
Hmm.
all of that present to enjoy it, and quietly inside be thankful for the extraordinary blessings that we enjoy as a society, for all of our imperfections, shortcomings, and missteps over the years, and then the
Yeah.
same individually. I mean, I have been blessed beyond all measure to have been able to lead America's sons and daughters in two different wars, 37 great years in uniform,
Yeah.
then to be the director of the CIA, and then to reinvent myself again, I guess, in the investment world, albeit doing largely what I was doing as the CIA director and senior general, which is to assess geopolitical risk and
Yeah.
opportunity and all the rest of that. But no, I've been fortunate just beyond any possible hopes, but also you work at it, as you well know. I mean, you are in the same realm in certain respects. I'm also on the speaking circuit and these other endeavors.
Hmm.
You have to hustle.
Yeah.
People don't get, again, life is a competitive endeavor. You don't get a trophy just for showing up like little kids soccer. You get it because you are achieving a degree of excellence, and ideally, hopefully, you're doing it while staying reasonably humble and not climbing over the backs of others, but being a good team
Right.
player as you're achieving this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the greatest quotes I heard was, success is earned and the rent is due every day.
Well, there's another one that I was fond of, because there are people, as you do achieve some degree of success, or I don't
Yeah.
know whether you call it profile, fame,
Right.
celebrity, whatever it is, obviously, there are going to be some who are envious and weren't as fortunate. And, they'll say, well, it's just lucky. And I guess my response would be that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And a lot of
Amen.
those who have achieved real success um, have done so by being prepared, so that when that timing arrived, when the luck came about, they were actually ready to capitalize on the opportunity. So preparation meeting opportunity, I think, is a pretty good description of
Yeah,
good fortune, or just sheer luck.
absolutely. You create your own luck. Well, I am very thankful that I was able to meet you and have you on the Next to Madison podcast. And I appreciate you sharing such insight on kind of what's going on in the world today. Where can people find more information about you? Obviously, your book. Is there anything you want to?
Well, on LinkedIn, my only social media is LinkedIn. I'm
Wonderful.
actually a LinkedIn top voice, whatever. That's sort of the LinkedIn version of an influencer. In fact, it was interesting because the LinkedIn people contacted me and they said, we must come see you. And I said, well, I'm in New York. They said, okay, we'll come. And I thought I was going to be reprimanded for violating one of their, I don't know, some unwritten rule or something. And they showed up with this big sweatshirt that said LinkedIn top voice on it. And that
Oh,
was that was their announcement that I'd been selected for that. It's 193,000 followers in climbing. Not that I'm competitive.
yeah.
But on there, I list all of the different activities in which I'm engaged. And I do a fair amount of posts. I do a post every night on Ukraine and another one on the Mideast. And these are based on, they're distilling what the Institute for the Study of War posts every evening. And I'm on
Okay.
their board, and we have the Petraeus Center for Emerging Leaders at the Institute for the Study of War. Really, really extraordinary organization. Has become, I think,
Wow.
the think tank of record for Ukraine and the Mideast, and the provider of the most precise and illuminating maps as well. But so I do, and then often the press that I do, if you'll tag me when you put this on LinkedIn, I will
Of course.
resend it to all my followers and so forth. And I find it a constructive endeavor.
Yeah.
So that's where, and they can see whatever academics or veterans organizations or others that I support.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, yes, go check him out on LinkedIn. Check out his book, Conflict, and hopefully you'll have a new book soon. Are you working on
There is
another
another
book?
one. Well, we just had the second edition of Conflict come out, and we added
Okay.
a chapter on Gaza, extended the chapter on Ukraine, and extended the one on the future of warfare, where you've seen a lot of that on the battlefield in Ukraine, particularly with unmanned aerial, ground, and maritime systems made by Ukraine, and very effective, but very, very inexpensive compared with the products
Yeah.
in the US and the Western world. But the next book is going to be titled From Battlefield to High Command. And it's about the very, very small number of military leaders in war who were very successful on the battlefield in individual battles, and then ultimately as the strategic leader. So Ulysses S. Grant,
Wow.
Wellington, General Ridgway, World War II and Korea, and a number of others, and actually one with whom I was privileged to serve in Iraq in multiple tours, General Ray Odierno, who was fellow division commander. Then he was the 3-star when I was a 4-star, very successful in that 3-star tour. Then he replaced me ultimately as the 4-star, and again was a superb strategic leader as well.
Wow. Well, I'll be excited for that. When do you think that'll be? In the next year or two?
I think it might take a little, we'll see, maybe 2. Yeah.
So yes, you guys keep an eye out for that. General Petraeus, thank you so much. I am you made my Thanksgiving. So thank you so
And
much.
you
I
made mine,
appreciate
and
it.
I hope that
Thank
you
you.
will be surrounded by friends and families as you feast on Thanksgiving Day.
Yes, absolutely. Amen. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone
Thank you.
listening, wherever you're at. We'll see you next time to find out who's next.
Hey, your host here, Madison Malloy. Please make sure to subscribe to the show on all podcast platforms, and please rate and review us on iTunes and Spotify. Also, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@next2madison.com. I thank you again for listening. Bye.